Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we discuss the depressing quarterback history of the Chicago Bears. Why are we talking about this? Well, as you guys know, in about a month and a half, the Bears have an opportunity with the number one overall pick, and they're going to take Caleb Williams, the quarterback out of USC, who looks like he's going to be a franchise quarterback, if not a franchise changing type of quarterback. And the narrative around the Chicago Bears and quarterbacks over the last 45, 50 years. And I've heard a lot of people talking about this when it comes to Caleb Williams, that he shouldn't want to go to the Bears, that the Bears will ruin him because the Bears have just looked at their history. It's been a lot of mediocre. They haven't had any elite quarterbacks over their, basically since like Sid Luckman or George Blanda. And because of that, Caleb Williams shouldn't want to go there because the Bears will ruin him. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this, because I think a lot of people believe that. And if you actually, and we'll do that here in a little bit, I think, is it that the Bears haven't been good at developing quarterbacks? Or is it because the Bears have just been kind of unlucky? Like, are the Colts good at developing quarterbacks? Or did they just draft Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck? Are the Cincinnati Bengals good at developing quarterbacks? Or did they just draft Carson Palmer and Joe Burrow? So I think a lot of this stuff is luck, and I think a lot of it is luck of being bad, and not just being bad, but bad in the right year. Because if you look at a lot of this stuff, and we'll go through this here in a little bit, a lot of it with the Bears is like the years that they drafted quarterbacks and were looking for a quarterback, there wasn't necessarily one in the draft. Or if they needed a quarterback, it's like the top, like we know that the elite quarterbacks are going to be taken in the top like 2 or 3 picks. And at least for the most part, we'll get into the Trubisky one, obviously, where that was kind of an outlier compared to the other Bears stuff. And it's like they end up taking like the third or fourth quarterback on the board. So they take the third or fourth best quarterback prospect in the draft. And that's kind of just something I wanted to talk about. Because if you go through and you look at the Bears quarterback history, and we're going to go through all of the years that they could have drafted a quarterback and the years that they actually did end up drafting a quarterback. So 1982, the Bears select Jim McMahon with the 5th overall pick from BYU to be their next franchise quarterback. And Jim McMahon, if you gave him 8 years of health, just 8 years of perfect health in the NFL with that Bears team in the 80s, Jim McMahon would have made the Hall of Fame. The reason Jim McMahon didn't make the Hall of Fame is because he just kept getting hurt. He was very injury prone, which, with the way you look at the NFL and how it was played in the 80s with the physicality of it, you don't blame him for being injury prone. But guys, there was a stretch in the middle of the 80s where when Jim McMahon was healthy, over like a 42 game sample size of Jim McMahon being healthy on the Chicago Bears, the Bears were 39-3. He was an awesome quarterback when he was healthy. And when he was healthy, the Bears were the best team in the NFL. But unfortunately, he just kept getting hurt. The one year he was the most healthy was the year that they won the Super Bowl, went 15-1, and were considered to be one of the greatest teams of all time, that 1985 team. So they have Jim McMahon. They win the Super Bowl in 85. And then we're getting past 85 to 86 and 87. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, the Bears, they know they have the Super Bowl team. They have a Super Bowl head coach. They have a Super Bowl defense. They need a quarterback that they can rely on and to be healthy. So they go ahead in 1987. They draft Jim Harbaugh at the end of the first round with the 26th pick in the draft, who Jim Harbaugh was a decent quarterback in the NFL, played for about a decade, but wasn't necessarily a franchise-changing quarterback, didn't necessarily change the Bears' fate at all with him at quarterback. All right, so get through the Bears in the 90s. There's another time they could have had a quarterback too, because I went through all of their draft history. 1990, they have the 6th pick in the draft. The reason I bring that up is because the 7th pick in the draft was a quarterback, and that quarterback was Andre Ware, who was the Heisman Trophy winner out of Houston. But Andre Ware only played 14 games in the NFL, so I don't necessarily blame the Bears for not taking Andre Ware there. Fast forward to 1998, similarly to what we were talking about earlier, being bad in the right years. They have the 5th pick in the draft, but the first 2 picks in the draft are Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf. So the 2 quarterbacks that were the franchise quarterbacks in that draft, the Bears are just out of reach for them, and there's no way that they are able to trade up to those 2 picks. There's no way that those teams are giving up those picks. No other really franchise-changing quarterbacks in that draft. The very next year, the Bears have the 7th pick in the draft. And guys, there were 5 quarterbacks taken in the top 12 in this draft. 5 quarterbacks taken in the top 12 in this draft. Number 1 was Tim Couch, then Don McNabb, then Achilles Smith, who went to the Bengals for the 3rd pick overall. And I have never heard of him before. And then this is where it gets kind of tricky if you're a Bears fan and you're the Bears and trying to defend them in this exercise. They have the 7th pick in the draft. They trade down from 7 to 12, the 11th pick in the draft. So right before the Bears, the Vikings select Dante Culpepper, who Dante Culpepper was pretty much toast by the time he was in his late 20s, but did make 3 Pro Bowls, was like a pretty, above average quarterback when he was in there. But to make matters even worse, the Bears make one of their worst draft picks in franchise history. They draft Cade McNown with the 12th pick in the draft, who I had never heard of him. And I have Bears fans in my life. I'd never heard of him until I started doing this exercise. He was an absolute bust. I don't think he played more than 12 games with the Bears. So fast forward to 2001, already know Cade McNown's a bust. The Bears draft David Terrell with the 8th pick in the draft, who was a wide receiver who only caught 9 touchdowns in his career. The reason I bring that up is the very first pick in the 2nd round that year was Drew Brees, who obviously Drew Brees is going to be a Hall of Famer. But even then, do I really blame the Bears for not drafting Drew Brees? Because he did have some good moments in San Diego, but it did look like his career was over, which is why he did end up getting sent to New Orleans. So who knows if the Bears end up drafting Drew Brees with that pick, what happens to Drew Brees' career? Does he, does he end up going to New Orleans? Does he find success in Chicago? So that one is a little bit different, but again, he was like a 6-foot quarterback that, his career ended up being unique for a lot of reasons. Fast forward to 2003, the Bears have the 22nd pick in the draft. Again, being bad in the right year helps, because who was the number 1 quarterback taken in 2003? It was Carson Palmer. The number 1 pick in the draft went to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bears have the 22nd pick in the draft. They take Rex Grossman with that pick, who Rex Grossman, similarly to Harbaugh, played about a decade in the NFL, but, what wasn't necessarily a franchise quarterback, a guy that, you could have put the team on his back, and he did go to a Super Bowl, but that was a defensive led team that went to the Super Bowl, and was like a decent quarterback, but was kind of interception prone. And, again, wasn't necessarily a superstar quarterback. All right. So we also have 2005. The Bears have the 5th pick in the draft. And again, they weren't looking for a quarterback in this draft. But I just wanted to point this out. They weren't looking for a quarterback because they just drafted Rex Grossman 2 years earlier, but they had the 5th pick in the draft. And the reason I bring that up is because that was the Aaron Rodgers draft. Okay. 2008, they had the 14th pick in the draft. Joe Flacco's taken with the 18th pick in the draft. Again, are we going to get mad at the Bears for not taking Joe Flacco? Okay. Now let's fast forward, because then, obviously, as you guys know, the Bears end up getting Jay Cutler. And basically the end of the 2000s, early 2010s, they have the Jay Cutler experiment for years there, which Jay Cutler was incredibly talented, but maybe wasn't necessarily the most motivated guy in terms of winning, maybe didn't have necessarily the best winning type of personality, if you could put it like that. So, but he was probably the one that was like maybe the most consistent as far as playing time for the Chicago Bears. So I think it was notable to point that out. But then they obviously move on from Jay Cutler. And then in 2017, this is probably obviously the worst mistake, as you guys know, with the Chicago Bears in their quarterback history. The Bears have the 3rd pick in the draft. They trade up from 3rd to 2nd to get Mitch Trubisky. And that is notable because Mitch Trubisky kind of sucks. And because about 10 picks later, the Chiefs trade up in the draft Patrick Mahomes. The Houston Texans draft Deshaun Watson. And Patrick Mahomes looks like he's going to be either the greatest quarterback of all time, if not the 2nd greatest quarterback of all time. And Deshaun Watson, take out the last 3 years, the first 4 to 5 years of his career, he was a spectacular quarterback. So that one is really bad. They do make a playoff game with Mitch Trubisky, and then they have the double doink. And then the Bears finally give up on Mitch Trubisky, and they decide to, in 2021, trade up to the 11th pick, where they take the fourth quarterback selected in this draft, and they take Justin Fields. And then we obviously know what's happened with Justin Fields the last few years. But now, and then too, we'll add this too. Obviously, 2023, they have the worst record in the league. They have the number one overall pick in the draft, and then they have an opportunity to draft Bryce Young or or CJ Stroud, and they opt to trade back in that for that pick because they're like, hey, let's build around Justin Fields. Let's give him some assets. We'll get DJ Moore, a wide receiver. We'll draft a tackle when we trade back to give somebody to protect Justin Fields. And so they could have gotten CJ Stroud last year, but instead they decided to build around Justin Fields for another year. But now they have lucked out. They have the number one pick in the draft, and they have a chance to take Caleb Williams. So again, going through that quarterback history with the Chicago Bears, are they this terrible team that doesn't know how to draft quarterbacks? Which I guess you could make that argument because maybe they didn't make the best decisions on a lot of these guys. But again, if you're looking at a lot of these guys in these drafts, like Rex Grossman wasn't the first quarterback taken. Cade McNown was the fifth quarterback taken. Jim Harbaugh was taken at the end of the first round. Jim McMahon was, again, I love Jim McMahon, fifth pick in the draft. Justin Fields was the fourth quarterback taken. And then if we look at all these other years that they could have drafted quarterbacks, it's like they had either just drafted a quarterback a year or two prior, or they already had like their guy in place. So if you really look at it, is it the fact that the Bears can't develop a lot of these guys? Or is it the fact that they're just honestly just kind of unlucky and they haven't been lucky where they're super bad in a year where they could get an awesome quarterback? And even if you look at this team now, they weren't even that, like, they won 7 games last year and they have the opportunity to take an awesome quarterback with this pick. So the good news for the Bears is that they have an opportunity to change their luck here, take Caleb Williams and reverse the quarterback fortune. And Caleb Williams has an opportunity to break all kinds of Chicago Bears records. Do the Bears right now have like the right head coach? Maybe not. Maybe not. But with the 9th pick in the draft too, and I wanted to point this out because we know they're taking Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is going to be great. I'm going to ignore a lot of the noise around him and the negative stuff because, again, every quarterback that we have, there's going to be negative stuff that's out about them. But I wanted to point this out here too because actually, I think maybe what the Bears do with the 9th, because everyone's saying like they have the 9th pick in the draft, and everyone's saying, well, just take a wide receiver with that, and then you have Caleb Williams and you have an awesome young wide receiver, and you're ready to go. The only problem I have with that is because we know Marvin Harrison's going to be taken pretty early. And then everyone is saying right now in their mock drafts that's going to be like Marvin Harrison. And then the next 2 guys that are going to be taken is going to be Malik Neighbors from LSU. And it's going to be Roman Dunze from Washington. And I think at least 2 of those guys will be taken before the Bears get to their draft pick. I think if you're the Bears, I think you just stay away from drafting a first-round wide receiver. And the reason I say that is just going through their history. Actually, their history of drafting wide receivers is actually a lot worse than them drafting quarterbacks because they have 2015, 7th pick in the draft. They have Kevin White. Kevin White, I knew he was a bust. He had 0 touchdowns his career, 0 receiving touchdowns. 2001, I believe we brought that up earlier. They have the 8th pick in the draft. They draft David Terrell, who only gets 9 touchdowns in his career. 9th pick in the draft, don't like that. 1993, they have the 7th pick in the draft. They draft Curtis Conway, who never made a Pro Bowl or anything, had a decent career, played for close to a decade. I think he caught like 53 touchdowns or something. 1988, they have the 27th pick in the draft. They'd get Wendell Davis. He played a few years in the league. I believe he only had like 14 touchdowns, but if you do touchdown inflation to today, it's maybe not as bad of a pick as you would like. But the Bears have just really had a bad wide receiver history. So I don't know if there's like holes with that pick that they can maybe shore up something with the defense. Maybe they could get another offensive lineman to protect Caleb Williams. But right now, if you're a Bears fan, has to be since like the 1980s. It has to be the most optimistic that you are about your future as a Bears fan, because if Caleb Williams is a guy that is worthy of being a number 1 overall pick, like a Joe Burrow, like a Peyton Manning, like guys like that, and he's in that class, a lot of this stuff does get kind of covered up with the Bears, and all of a sudden Caleb Williams gets to be the most famous, best quarterback in Chicago Bears history. He has that opportunity to do that because I do think the Bears are a talented team. And if Caleb Williams is awesome right out the gate, the Bears might make the playoffs next season. So there you have it, guys. That's basically it. Hope you guys enjoyed me going over the Bears quarterback history. This is my show, the Sports Detective Podcast Show. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. We talk about NFL stuff, college football stuff, NBA stuff, college basketball, some sports media stuff every once in a while. If you like any of that stuff, maybe explore our page and see if you find another video that you like. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you next time.